I'm going to be using share screen. So,
thank you. Go for it whenever you're ready, Nancy.
Okay, I will. So before we start with the share screen, first of all, I'm glad to see you all. Those of you whose faces I see, some of you I see more regularly. Sandy I see because from my Melton classes, different people I see for different reasons on Zoom most of the time, but it's wonderful to have you all together. I have you right now, if you'll go ahead and mute for the time being. I don't know how many people are going to be coming into the class, and so right now I can see everybody. I can see the participants on my screen, but I don't know how many are going to be coming in, so I don't know how many will go. You know, my screen will only take 25. So I don't know in the end how many it's going to be. So I won't be able to necessarily respond to all of your questions if I can't see you. So I'm going to ask you to use the chat function if you have a question. And I'll stop every couple of screens and look to see if there's anybody that's submitted a question or anything like that. So if you'll try to use it just for questions, because otherwise sometimes it gets very distracting. Or comments, of course, obviously, always comments. If you haven't taken a class with me before, know that I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear what you're thinking about the text. And these texts to me speak on their own, but they also speak from years and years of interpretation. What I wanted to do today is look at the text, try to see them each individually, and then also try to see how they fit into Rosh Hashanah and today, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, next week, the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and then finally Yom Kippur at the end. These are long texts. We're not going to have a time to go into them in huge depth, and I apologize in advance. What I hope this discussion does is get you primed, get you ready for the High Holy Days, and get you thinking about what these texts, how they connect to the text, and how they connect to the holiday, and how they can connect to us as well. So I'm gonna, like I said, I'm going to go on the share screen. If you still want to see me, you can use the speaker view function on your Zoom. And is there anything anybody wants to say before I get started? All right, in that case, I'm gonna share my screen. And it's not showing me my, I'm gonna go back to the desktop. Let's see. I'm going, Sherry Ann, wait a minute. Let me get there it is. Okay, I'm really sorry about this, that it took me a while to get there, but here we are. Okay, good. So hopefully you can see this. Let me get us into a slideshow. And there we go. All right. So the first thing I wanted to do was start with the themes for Rosh Hashanah and the names of the holiday and the themes. And we're just going to go over it very quickly. And the idea is to have these names in the back of our head and these themes in the back of our head to see how how the readings that we're going to have apply to what we're doing. So Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the year. Rosh meaning the head, and that's idiomatic, that it's the beginning of a year. Yom Truah, the day of the shofar call. Okay, Yom Hadin, today is Judgment Day. The idea that the world is being judged and each individual person is being judged. Yom Harat HaOlam, the day that the world was created, the birthday of the world is in early childhood parlance. It's a good way to describe it to children. And then Yom HaZikaron, it's a day for remembering, not Yom HaZikaron in terms of the Shoah or Memorial Day in Israel, but the day for remembering, for remembrance. And of course, that is echoed as well in the Zichronot part of the service down below, the themes of, in the liturgy, God's sovereignty, remembrances, and then the Shofarot again. And some of the liturgy also, the idea of who shall live and who shall die, the idea of judgment, the idea of preordained, God's omnipotence, God's power, God's knowledge. Anyway, before we go on, does anybody have anything that they would like to comment on here? Is there? Now I can't see you, so I can't. Let's see. Oh, here's something new that I've never seen. It's a pause share. No. Okay. Well, let's go on and resume the share. All right. Let's move on then. So we have two Torah readings that, and I put the Haftarah first on purpose. You'll see why in a minute. There's less to discuss for the Haftarah. And then there's the traditional Torah reading that we read on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. And then the Reform movement uses the Genesis Torah reading as well, the creation of the world. Next week, I will share with you the Talmudic text where we have this discussion about what is read when. And but for right now, I just wanted to let you know that we'll get that for next week. Okay, so Aileen, I can see your face right at the top. Would you like to read this for us? This screen, the numbers Haftarah, so if you'll unmute yourself.
Yeah. In the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. You shall observe it as a day when the horn is sounded. You shall present a burnt offering of pleasing odor to the Lord, 1 bull of the herd, 1 ram, and 7 yearling lambs without blemish. The meal offering with them, choice flour with oil mixed in, shall be 3/10 of a measure for a bull, 2/10 for a ram, and 1/10 for each of the 7 lambs. And there shall be 1 goat for a sin offering to make expiation on your behalf. In addition to the burnt offering of the new moon with its meal offering and the regular burnt offering with its meal offering, each with its libation as prescribed, offerings by fire of pleasing odor to the Lord.
Perfect, thanks. Okay, I'm going to stop the share for a minute so I can see everybody on the screen. Okay, great. Now, I can see everybody. Unmute if you have a comment at this point. Which of the themes did you see in that particular, which of the themes did you see in that reading that we just did? Go ahead and just speak out if you feel like you've got it. Anybody wants to unmute and comment? All right, in the very first verse, what is the purpose of the holiday? It tells us what the purpose of the holiday is. Okay, remember you're muted, so I can't hear you if you're speaking up. So
blowing of the shofar.
Shofar.
Exactly, it's for blowing the shofar. Does it give us any other reason for the holiday? There's one more at the very end. Not the very end, the next to the last verse.
An expiation.
Expiation for our sins, right? Okay, but that's not the main thing, because that's also, if you look at that in the Haftarah for the other holidays services that we have, that's a normal thing. We have that. That's part of every holiday. That we have the sacrifices, the different kinds of sacrifices for Hatat. It's there for all the holidays, so it's not specific for Rosh Hashanah. So That's our Haftarah. That's actually one of the very few entrances. That's one of the very few mentions of Rosh Hashanah at all in the whole Torah. There's in Parshat and more, but there's not a whole lot more. So the main idea for Rosh Hashanah here is it's on the seventh day, the first day of the seventh month, and you blow the shofar. Okay, so there's not much to, not anything else that we need to know about that. Anything else? Any comments about the Haftarah at this point? Okay, then I'm going to go back to the screen share, and we're going to now look at the Genesis 21 chapter. I don't know if Sherry Ann is still there, so let me admit whoever was just there.
I am still here.
Okay, I didn't know whether you were there.
I'll be with you till the end.
Oh, the bitter end. All right, here we go. All right, so now let's look at the Genesis 21. All right, Sandy, you're the next person I see on my screen, so you get to read.
Okay. The Lord took note of Sarah as he had promised, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the set time for which God had spoken. Abraham gave his newborn son, whom Sarah had borne him, the name of Isaac. And when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him.
Okay, Sarah, let's wait a minute. And we're going to move on to the next screen. Norma, would you like to read this next screen? Verses 6 through 8. Unmute yourself before you start.
Sarah said, God has brought me laughter. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle children? Yet I have borne a son in his old age. The child grew up and was weaned, and Abraham held a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned.
Thank you very much. Perfect. Okay, we're going to read the whole thing and then we'll go back. So the next screen, let's see. Is that Andrew Siegelson? Is that you? Unmute.
Okay, got it. Sarah saw the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had borne to Abraham playing. She said to Abraham, cast out that slave woman and her son, for the son of that slave shall not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his.
Okay, before we move on, I want to just say one word about translation, and then verse 9 in particular. This translation, as every translation is interpretive. There's no way to have a translation without interpreting in some way, because you don't have direct one-to-one correspondence of words. This particular translation is a very simplified translation. I think it's a JPS, Jewish Publication Society. I took it off of Sefaria.org, and I chose the newest version of the Jewish Publication Society. The word in verse 9 is very problematic. The word playing is problematic. The Hebrew is mitzachek, and it's the same root as the word for laughter, which we saw 2 times at least previously in this chapter. But here, the word playing, it causes all sorts of questions for the rabbis. And I'm just going to sort of let you know right now that some people say it was fondling, it was had sexual implications. Some people said it was mockery, whatever. This is part of the rabbinic tradition. And that, of course, flavors why Abraham would cast out Hagar and her son as well. Okay, so I just wanted to say that, because I know somebody's going to comment on it otherwise, so I'm preemptively commenting on it. Okay, so we're going to go to the next screen. Rhonda, unmute yourself because you're reading the next screen. You're next on my...
Okay, But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed over the body or your slave. Whenever Sarah tells you, do as she says, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be continued for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him too, for he is your seed.
Thank you. And next, who is next on my reading? Joyce, why don't you read? Unmute yourself.
Early next morning, am I unmuted? Yeah.
You're great. We hear you.
Okay. Early next morning, Abraham took some bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He placed them over her shoulder, together with the child, and sent her away. And she wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water was gone from the skin, she left the child under one of the bushes and went and sat down at a distance, a bowshot away. For she thought, let me not look on as the child dies. And sitting thus afar, she burst into tears.
Good. Rona, let's go ahead and you unmute.
God heard the cry of the boy, and an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heeded the cry of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and let the boy drink.
Wonderful. Kathy, unmute, and we'll have you read the next screen.
God was with the boy, and he grew up. He dwelt in the wilderness and became a bowman. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt.
Wonderful. Okay, we're going to stop the share. Good. Now, all right, so this is the first part of this Torah reading, and the last part, which I'm watching my time very carefully. We might skip over the next part because just I want to have time to look at the Haftarah. What are some of the themes that we looked at the beginning, the names of the holidays or the themes of the holidays that we talked about, that you're seeing in this particular reading, the story of Hagar being sent out into the wilderness and her interaction with God, her interaction with Sarah, her interaction with Abraham, and of course, Ishmael as well. So if you have something to say, now's the time. Let's unmute everybody can unmute unless you've got noise in the background so you can join in the conversation.
I would say the judgment day that's being judged.
Who's being judged?
Ron, I think Hagar, Sarah's judging Hagar and Ishmael.
So Sarah's the judge, the person who's judging. Okay, all right. What else? Anybody else?
I would say it's Malchuyot, the idea from this of God as of God showing her sovereignty.
Okay, so the idea of sovereignty, that God, because God tells Abraham what to do and Abraham does it and follows that, the idea.
Well, not only that from this, because as a sovereign from this, there's also a little bit of judgment and some recompense for the people who are being judged.
Okay, all right, great. Who else? Anybody else?
Yes, sovereignty comes in when God keeps promising Abraham that each son will have a nation.
Right. That's absolutely. So not just sovereignty for God, but that the nation, the idea of sovereign nations as well.
Right.
Okay, wonderful. Sandy?
Yeah, it also sparks of beginnings.
Yeah.
Because it's the beginning, it's a birth, it's the beginning now of two different lines of what will become two great religions. And so in terms of being the birthday of the world, it's the birthday of the science of a new generation, of a new religion.
Great. And if you
Also,
hold on just a second, Rhoda. If you look at the end of, don't look at it now, but if you downloaded the materials that I sent, there's some readings about that as well that come from the Lev Shalem from our own Machzor as well. And they say it better than I could, but not as well as Sandy did.
One other comment is that the first part, it talks about Abraham's son, and then it switches to Sarah saying, my son will inherit, not that other woman's son.
Okay, so that the switch happens, why do you think? You just commented.
That Abraham had two sons involved, so she's distinguishing it's her son, and that, quote, lowly slave girl's son is not going to inherit. It's also the beginning of Jewish men being told about their wives what to do, and it turns out to be correct.
Oh dear, I'm not sure I want to hear that. Rhoda, what were you going to say?
okay, well, nothing in that vein, but it's also zichronot in that we're remembering how the Jewish nation began.
Absolutely. And I think that it's also very important because almost at the very beginning of the Torah service, almost at the very beginning of the Torah, not the Torah service, but the Torah portion, it says, Adonai pakad et Sarah. And God remembered Sarah. And that's an important, it's not the same word, it's not the same Hebrew word. The Hebrew root for remembering is both Zayin Kaf Resh, Zachar, but it's also Pei Kuf Daled, Pakad. And so here you've got that as well. The remembering is very, very important part of this. Is there anybody else here is there anything else you wanted to comment on?
So also in the vein of remembering, it's remembering God's promise to make Abraham's seed into a great nation. So this is zichronot, as opposed to remembering which pakad, which is relative to Sarah, but the clarification rather than the switch. It wasn't a switch, but a clarification that the blessings that God promised Abraham were going to be through Isaac, as God then said, yes, listen to Sarah.
Right, right. And especially because, I mean, we know from the text that we read, especially later on, we know that women the matriarchs have God's ear. You know, Rebecca goes to talk to God, Vayelech lidrosh et Hashem. So she goes and she talks directly to God in a way that Isaac doesn't get to do when she's praying for a child. So, and that seems to be the women have God's ear in the earlier, in the Genesis narrative that we have. So any other comments about this?
Yeah, they use the term remembered her, which is what they did with Hannah,
right,
whereas the other women, God opened their womb.
Right.
So,
well, but we use pakad in, yes, yes, and we're going to look and see about Hannah as well in just a few minutes when we get there. Norma, were you getting ready to say something? Norma, you're muted.
This doesn't have anything to do specifically, but a general observation about the Torah. It seems like this is the first case in the Torah of the younger child taking precedence over the older. And that seems to be a repetitive theme in the Torah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is one, and again, I don't feel like I'm prepared to delve into that today because it's not quite as apropos to the holiday itself, but it's absolutely true. All right, Sue, you have a question? Oh, Sue is using her raise hand. If you go to participants and you find you can raise your hand if you would like. Sue, go ahead and make sure you unmute.
Well, that becomes the proof text for us when we do the Amidah that includes the matriarchs when we say Magen Avraham Ufoked Sarah.
Absolutely, Poked Sarah. Interestingly enough, in the Reform movement, they don't say Poked Sarah, they say Ezrat Sarah, the helper of Sarah. So just, you know, different. I like to bring that in because I think that just in general, I think that it's important that we see that there are multiple traditions, even within liberal Judaism, of which conservative, believe it or not, the conservative movement is part of that trend. So, all right, anything else? All right, let's look for just a few minutes more. Let's look at the end of the Torah portion. We've already seen the Haftarah, so we're at least ahead of ourselves that way. So this will be verse 22. And Phyllis, unmute yourself because you're going to read.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay, here it is.
Okay, verse 22. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, chief of his troops, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything that you do. Therefore, swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my kith and kin, but will deal with me and with the land in which you have sojourned as loyally as I have dealt with you. And Abraham said, okay.
Go ahead, I swear it.
And Abraham said, I swear it.
Okay, thank you. All right, and let me see who I've got here. All right, next. Martin, do you want to join for us? Do you want to read this for us?
Sure. Then Abraham reproached Abimelech for the well of water which the servants of Abimelech had seized. But Abimelech said, I do not know who did this. You did not tell me, nor have I heard of it until today. Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a pact.
All right, and so let's finish it up. Bill, are you in a position where you can unmute and read that? Bill Stern?
Yeah, Abraham then set 7 ewes of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what mean these 7 ewes which you have set apart? He replied, you are to accept these 7 ewes from me as proof that I dug this well. Hence that place was called Beersheba, for there the two of them swore an oath.
Okay, and that is the end of the Torah reading. Oh my goodness, I just lost my entire screen. This is crazy, you know. All right, let me stop the share if I can figure out how to do it without, I have lost my, there it is. I've lost my controls. All right, so what does this part of the Torah reading have to do with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Not even Yom Kippur, just Rosh Hashanah. Think back on those themes. Is there anything about that or about any of the anything you know, the liturgy that you think about that connects it to the holiday?
They both made vows and basically signed it, so to speak, with exchange of gifts.
Right. Now remember, vows we're leading up to vows at this point. We're not quite there yet because Yom Kippur is the day for vows and for annulling and for making new ones. But certainly in the rabbinic tradition, Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of that we have to, you know, when we approach people to ask for forgiveness and things like that. So absolutely, that's part of it. Anything else that?
Well, it's all a new start. It's a fresh start with Isaac and Abraham to move forward.
Okay, and here we are again with the start, the idea of starting something new. Okay, And it's also the start of hopefully a peaceful pact between Avimelech and Abraham. Okay.
There's also a discussion of loyalty, in this case between Abraham and Avimelech, when in the beginning we talk about the loyalty to God. So there seems to be a bit of a connection there.
I would say that the idea of even that perhaps with sovereignty, the idea that two sovereign nations can make an agreement, you can have a pact, it has something to do with the dignity with which you treat the other person.
I also see the theme of Malchuyot, but it's more in the sense of Avimelech recognizing that God is with Abraham. And so while there's a lot of bad dealings in general in the world, he says, I don't want us to do that. I know God is with you, so you're in a position to harm me if you wanted to. So I want you to swear not to harm me.
Okay. And there's the whole, and this idea of, let's see, how do I put this? When we get into to the book of Jonah at the end of Yom Kippur, the people around Jonah, the city of Nineveh, the sailors, recognize God's sovereignty as well. And it looks like Abimelech at least is willing to accept, maybe not recognize, but accept Abraham's loyalty, that idea of Malchuyot. I also like to think that Abimelech and Malchuyot, they share a same root in Hebrew too. So that, goodness knows, I'm sure somebody somewhere has commented on that one as well. All right. Any general comments you want to make about this Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah, for the first day of Rosh Hashanah? Okay, you all know that next week it's going to get equally as, well, maybe not equally, but it will get more certainly disturbing. Is anybody disturbed that this is the Torah reading that we read?
Well, I was curious why we don't read the creation, since we also consider it the birthday of the world.
Well, that again, Rona, you asked a good question. We'll look at that next week when we look at the Talmudic passage about what's assigned. The actual truth is there's not a whole lot of discussion about why, but we can look and see why. But it's an interesting passage.
Chose that to read instead.
Yeah, it's a very interesting passage. So from the Talmud to read about that. But you know, I mean, the Reform movement chose to do that. They also, I mean, I grew up in the Reform movement, so I know that not everybody reads that. I know at Emmanuel, where I grew up, the alternative service did the Bereshit passage, and the regular service did the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. And so it just, you know, so again, that's
the binding of Isaac is because of the shofar, I would assume.
Well, we're going to read let's read it next week.
Okay, that's partly why, anyway.
Let's read it next week and see. Okay, anything else, Sandy?
You have two cases of conflict. It introduces conflict. There's a conflict between Sarah and Hagar. There's a conflict between Abraham and Abimelech. So very early on, we're introducing the idea of conflict and sometimes resolution of the conflict, but as Middle East has taught us, it maybe not have gotten very, very well resolved.
But the idea of having that conflict out in the open on Rosh Hashanah gives us a chance to try to resolve it. And isn't that what Rosh Hashanah is about? I see Sue has raised her hand again. Sue, thank you for doing that. It really helps me.
Not at all. Perhaps this is, we're seeing in the interactions with humans, how we're supposed to open in interactions with God. In the case of Abimelech from this, it's the idea from this that we're going to see later in sacrifices that are brought to the temple from this of that is our way of expiation for our sins from this, but it's also a way of honor to God from this, and also opening a dialogue with God in the way that it's of that God does see and hear and does respond when we do call out.
Okay, wonderful. I love the idea that it's a two-level text. All right, we are going to look right now at the Haftarah. The Haftarah text is actually in two different chapters. I don't think we're going to have time to look at the second chapter. I think we're just going to have time to look at the first. And I will tell you that the second chapter is it's a prayer to God. It's Hannah's prayer to God. Doesn't necessarily reflect what goes on in the first chapter, but I think that the narrative in the first chapter, the narration, is probably it will probably give us the most chance to discuss. So let me get that up on the screen for you. And I'm looking to see who's here. Ed, you're going to read the first one, so get yourself ready. Okay, and we're just going to read by screens. Here we go. All right, Ed, why don't you start?
There was a man from Ramadan of the Zuppatites in the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeram, son of Elu, son of Torah, son of Juppah, Ephraimite.
I'm sorry, I should have told you to start with verse 2 because that's the important part. Verse 2.
I understand that. He had two wives, one named Hannah and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah was childless. The man used to go up from his town every year to worship and to offer sacrifices to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh. Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord there. One day, on such a day, Elkanah offered a sacrifice. He used to give portions to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah, he would give one portion only, though Hannah was his favorite, for the Lord had closed her womb. Moreover, her rival, to make her miserable, would taunt her that the Lord had closed her womb.
Okay, Glory, go ahead.
This happened year after year. Every time she went up to the house of the Lord, the other would taunt her, so that she wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah said to her, Hannah, why are you crying and why aren't you eating? Why are you so sad? Am I not more devoted to you than 10 sons? After they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose. The priest Eli was sitting on the seat near the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. In her wretchedness, she prayed to the Lord, weeping all the while.
Okay.
And she
let's see, on verse 11. Did I skip ahead? I'm sorry.
No.
Okay, good. All right. Phyllis, why don't you pick up for us, verse 11.
Okay. And she made this vow, O Lord of hosts, if you will look upon the suffering of your maidservant and will remember me and not forget your maidservant, if you will grant your maidservant a male child, I will dedicate him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor shall ever touch his head. As she kept on praying before the Lord, Eli watched her mouth. Now Hannah was praying in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice could not be heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. Eli said to her, how long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Sober up.
He seems like such a kind person, doesn't he?
You know, well, we'll talk about it.
Corinne, will you read for us on verse 15? Unmute. Corinne, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry.
Okay. Go ahead.
And
Start
Hannah,
at verse 15.
Verse 15. And Hannah replied, "Oh no, my lord, I am a very unhappy woman. I have drunk no wine or other strong drink, but I have been pouring out my heart to the Lord. Do not take your maidservant for a worthless woman. I have only been speaking all this time out of my great anguish and distress." "Then go in peace," said Eli, "and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." She answered, "You are most kind to your handmaid." So the woman left, and she ate and was no longer downcast.
Thank you. Andy, go ahead and unmute and read the next screen. Andy?
Early the next morning, they bowed low before the Lord, and they went back home to Ramah. Elkanah knew his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. Hannah conceived, and at the turn of the year bore a son. She named him Shmuel, meaning, "I asked the Lord for him." And when the man Elkanah and all his household were going up to offer to the Lord the annual sacrifice and his votive sacrifice, Hannah did not go up. She said to her husband, "When the child is weaned, I will bring him. For when he has appeared before the Lord, he must remain there for good."
Thank you. Sue, will you read for us on the next screen?
Her husband Elkanah said to her, "Do as you think best. Stay home until you have weaned him. May the Lord fulfill his word." So the woman stayed home and nursed her son until she weaned him. When she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with 3 bulls, 1 ephah of flour, and a jar of wine. And though the boy was still very young, she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. After slaughtering the bull, they brought the boy to Eli. She said, "Please, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you and prayed to the Lord. It was this boy I prayed for, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. I, in turn, hereby lend him to the Lord. For as long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord." And they bowed low there before the Lord.
Okay, let me just take a moment to say that the word lish'ol, I ask for, and to loan, lahash'il, it's the same Hebrew root, it's the same word, same root, and there's a play on word here that we're getting. So thank you, Sue. And that is the end of chapter 1. And I think what we're going to do is, if I can, I've got, there it is. Let me stop the share. And I've got everybody. I can see your faces again, those of you that are showing me your faces. And let's talk about this in terms of those themes. Let's go back. Do you need me to scroll back to look at the themes and the names, or do you think you have those? So, Martin, go ahead.
Yes, so 2 things that come up. One is that Samuel turns out to be the kingmaker, ultimately.
Absolutely.
So that's the Malchuyot. The other one is, again, you get God remembering Hannah, this time not using the word pakad, but actually using the common word for remember, Zayin Chafresh. So.
Right, which again, Zichronot, Lizkor, all of that, that's certainly part of the mix, the thematic connection. What about the connection between Sarah and Hannah? It's just to belabor the obvious. Sandy.
Yeah, well, again, there's a theme that runs throughout a lot of the woman who is having trouble conceiving. And my assumption is at that point in time in history, that was the woman's main role, was to bear and rear children. And that was, if you could not do that, then if I could draw an analogy to an old 1950s or 60s song about the Aborigine whose boomerang wouldn't come back, it violated the norms of what society expected of people. A second thing is the woman who could have children, the wife who could have children, taunting the one who couldn't have children. the one who couldn't have children was the favorite one, like Rachel was the favorite, whereas Leah didn't seem to have trouble conceiving. And I guess another one is the insensitivity of some men, where a husband says, am I not more devoted to you than 10 sons? And the priest saying, are you a drunk?
Right.
Instead of trying to understand and empathize with what was going through her mind of I need this, and it should have said, am I not more devoted to you? It's just, are you not as prized to me?
Okay, great. But so there is a real, there's a definite comparison between Sarah and Hannah in this respect.
Yeah, it also is the idea of the beginning of the year, new birth, rebirth, etc.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I was thinking,
Rona.
Yeah, so I was thinking in terms of request, asking God, especially with Hannah. I guess it's Sarah's way too. She's asking, she's praying to God, and so getting something, getting an answer. So the theme on the high holidays is we're asking, for forgiveness, not for baby, but we're asking for something.
Right. I think just in general, the theme of
that God responds. God will respond.
God responds, that prayer, that there is efficacy in prayer. I think that I think that probably runs through all of Jewish learning and all of
right.
Jewish,
but particularly we're emphasizing that on a high holiday, that we're as a group asking.
Right. Right, but here it's not group. But
no, but
what's the connection here of these two women to the group? I think that that's an important. I think that that's a really important thing with Sarah, and with Isaac. That was the beginning of the covenant. Okay, I see Rhoda's hand.
Well, I was going to say. Oops. Hi. I was going to say. I think it's another. In the sense of God's sovereignty of Malchiyot, God said, let's, follow Sarah's wishes, because Isaac will be part of this nation we're starting.
Right.
And Samuel, and the same theme of Malchiyot, God's sovereignty, that Hannah had Samuel, who became kind of an agent of God setting up the monarchy.
Right. Well, Samuel was a very important prophet.
Yeah,
he was considered
exactly.
He was considered a prophet. God talked to him directly.
Yes. And so the monarchy with Saul and David and Solomon. So again, God's setting up the kind of the outline of how the Jewish people would develop.
Right. Okay, great. All right. What about Andrew? Go ahead. I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one little point, or maybe two little points. That Eli, the Kohen Gadol, was recognized that he was not given prophecy, so he didn't understand what it was that Hannah was doing. And Hannah, on the other hand, was extremely humble, and she didn't ask for herself. She asked in order that she have a worthy son that can then be lent back to God, to be a Nazir, to be fully dedicated in his life. So it's themes of the future of our nation, but they're connected to, I think, whom God chooses to reveal his word to. In that case, he didn't reveal his word to Eli. He connected with Hannah, and that from humility, from true prayer and humility, and really we learn, the whole point of how we do Amidah, of praying with our lips moving, but silently, we're learning it from Hannah. So the whole future of Judaism is tied to her.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to do that eventually at some point if I had remembered. So thank you for reminding us about that, about Hannah about her way of praying. I wanted to bring, I thank you again, Andrew, too, for mentioning the word Nazir, that Shmuel was a Nazir. His mother made a vow for him that he would, you know, that like Samson. Samson was supposed to be a Nazir as well, and when his hair was cut, he lost his strength. The different parts of the vow of the Nazirite were important, but again, that's the idea of the vow and the fulfillment of a vow. But we also have just the whole. We have that idea of. I'm trying to put this into good words where it works. While it's not the same thing, there's some equivalency between the idea of a vow that you make and that you fulfill, and the covenant that God made with the Jewish people, with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then through the generations with us. This idea of covenant, and that we saw with Avram and Avimelech as well. This idea of making a covenant, of making an agreement, and being loyal to that, and with the vows and how we fulfill them. While they're not exact and they're not exactly equivalent, they have echoes of each other and that go throughout the whole High Holy Day season. Am I stretching that too far? You'll accept that from me? Okay, good. All right. I'm glad to hear it. Is there anything else that anybody wants to comment about this particular Torah, about this Haftarah?
I wanted to add something about what Andrew said about the model for prayer that Hannah read. So, you know, we talk about the position of women and all they do, but the rabbis clearly throughout the ages said that the way to pray properly is to do it the way Hannah did it. Right. So the misogyny of the rabbis is not 100%.
That might be true. That's true. But, you know, Rhonda will have heard me say this millions of times. The Torah was, you know, the literacy, the literature, the writing, all of those things was in the hands of men. It was not usually in the hands of women. So, although the women were probably the ones who taught their children more because they were with their children, the literature did not seem to be in the hands of women. So, Corinne, it looked like you had your hand up a minute ago. Did you?
Yes, ma'am, I did. I wanted to mention that there's an element perhaps of judgment here and fair treatment, because Elkanah preferred Hannah, but he only gave her one portion.
Okay, so the idea of justice and fairness, okay.
Yeah.
He gave her one portion, but then he gave her a lot of trouble by saying, am I not, whatever.
Typical man, right?
Or was the one portion just control, just making sure he had control over everything?
Oh, Rhonda, the romantic in me says it was fair.
I assume the one portion was because it's a portion of the food, and so that there were more people, so they got more.
And remember too, that was the sacrifice that they were reading. That was they were eating the sacrifice, and so everybody in the family needed to do that. Glory, did you have your hand up? It looks like you're. Oh,
you're talking to me again?
Beautiful.
There's perhaps an element here of God giving us what we need rather than what we want.
Maybe. Yeah. In the end, Hannah got both what she wanted and what we, the Jewish people, apparently needed. So that being said, I'm looking at my watch, and my watch says that we're just about finished. So I want to go back real quickly to the screen share. I just want to show you what the materials are. You have you can access these if you haven't already. I see some of you printed them up. You really did a quick job of printing because they didn't come out until about 11:15. But I'll get these will be out earlier next time. but I wanted to show you at the very end of the screen share what we have in it. Let's see. In the additional readings we have from the Machzor, from our Machzor. So here there are 2 readings, and they're just comments about why these were chosen, the readings were chosen. This one, Mishkan HaNefesh, is from the Reform movement. And their Machzor is somewhat different from our Machzor, but like our Machzor Lev Shalem, it has some wonderful commentary. And so I included that for you. And then this one, again, this is the last page of the handout is again from our Machzor. So anyway, that's it for today, unless there's anybody else that wants to give us another comment or anything else that you have to offer. Next week, day 2, Rosh Hashanah. So,
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Wonderful program.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
That's interesting.
Thank you.
Next week.
Next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. Sherry Ann,
Yes, ma'am.
I think we're good to go.
All right.
All right. Thanks
Let's
a
see
bunch.
it. No problem. Talk to you later.